So in fact, I'm hoping you'll take this opportunity during the course of the day to correct me as I go wrong. But I also thought that I'd take this opportunity to perhaps give a slightly different perspective on some of the activities that we're doing at ANSTO. I think there's a really well understood narrative around how through nuclear stewardship we support and engage research activities around the country. We also look after and curate well over $1 billion in research infrastructure and nuclear infrastructure for the benefit of the country and for literally thousands of researchers coming through ANSTO. And of course, there's a very well understood narrative around the benefits of nuclear medicine. But I think I might use the N word, so call me naive. But there is, I think, a really different atmosphere out there about nuclear. There's a new interest, there's a new dialogue, and there's increasing discussion in the sphere of not only nuclear power, but all forms of nuclear technology. So that leads me to the sort of cornerstone of this short presentation, which is how can ANSTO help collaborate and partner with not only with everybody in this room, but with all interested stakeholders in planning for our nuclear future. So of course, we often begin with the concept of nuclear stewardship in its broad sense. Our nuclear baseline, our nuclear stewardship is effectively underpinning our nuclear assurance, our license to operate, if you like. And indeed, I think most people, when we talk about nuclear stewardship to the general public, have that kind of broad concept of saying, yep, we get that. We get that ANSTO are one of the people or one of the organisations that have this key touchstone responsibility for a broad understanding and assurance in the nuclear space. But I think when we talk about it as more of a term of art that I think many here will be familiar with, it really goes more deeply into that responsible planning, operation, application, management, all of those aspects of the leadership of nuclear facilities that ensure, and the key words here are safety, security, safeguards and sustainability. And all of those things have to be present for the nuclear industry to achieve its maximum impact in the longer term in Australia. And the way that ANSTO interacts to bring about those things is manifold. Obviously, we work, in fact, we were just hearing about the complexity of our legislative environment. We do work in a complex and highly regulated environment. But in fact, I think that is not something that we should reflect on as something that puts us into shackles and limits what we do. In some ways, the fact that we can navigate this environment and be shown to be operating within it responsibly and not forever being brought to court and being brought to heel for having breached something, if we can show that we're actually operating in this environment in a way that is effective, then you've got a really big tick in your book already because, first of all, understanding the complexity and the range of the regulations is a good ask, but actually operating complex facilities in that environment and doing it in a way that complies with that legislation is a really big plus. So I think this is something we should take as a positive and something that we can really hold up. I think another area where we can test our ability to really prosecute this notion of stewardship is through our international connections. ANSTO, like many organisations, has a wide range of international connections. I'm not going to go through all of the logos on that slide, but obviously the IAEA, I told you I've only been in the job for 8 months, is one where ANSTO's a responsible partner and also actually many times is a go-to partner for that organisation in running activities, running programs. And so of course we use this international environment, this international ecosystem as a way of benchmarking, as a way of testing ourselves. So yet this is another area that ANSTO has a strong interest in continuing to prosecute. But I think when we talk about stewardship, the thing that really underpins it and the thing that we always have to be cognizant of is the culture of the organisation and the organisations that we work with. Because even though it's something that is sometimes regarded as being a bit amorphous, sometimes being a bit hard to pin down, if you don't have that culture right, then you can't be a responsible nuclear steward for the country. And of course, that involves not just having the right sort of attitude in your workforce, having the right sort of settings in risk-taking in the appropriate areas. I often remark to some of our scientists that while we're in operations, our risk-taking is incredibly conservative. Sometimes in the laboratory, that's exactly what you want to be doing. You want to be taking the big risks to make those scientific advances. So it's that question of having appropriate risk settings in appropriate circumstances. But the other aspects of that culture are things that perhaps we take for granted, particularly for people with strong science-based organisations. But that questioning mindset, that ability to challenge and question somebody help me out with the right word here, to challenge and question the orthodoxy, to challenge and question the received knowledge that comes down, so that we're always testing those attitudes. And that, I think, is one of the things that's fundamental to ANSTO as an organisation. Now, we often talk in this dialogue, and as I said, there's that strong dialogue about the research activities that ANSTO undertakes. And I thought I'd focus in on some that are, on the ones in this talk that are more directly nuclear focused. We often talk about the applications of nuclear technologies, for instance, in environment and human health. We often talk about the off-spinnings of nuclear technologies, so for instance through the Australian Centre for Neutron Science, neutron scattering, where we can actually undertake a range of experiments, and indeed the broader concept of the nuclear tradition through accelerator science, with the Centre for Accelerator Science at ANSTO, and of course now the Australian Synchrotron down in Melbourne. So these I think are well understood, but where we really focus in are in areas in nuclear fuel cycle. And this is an area where there's a number of people, a number of my colleagues in this audience, some of whom are speaking today. So you'll be hearing from Andrei Moransky later on about the use of materials, investigating materials for use in nuclear applications, some of the challenges that we face in those environments. Of course, at the early stage in that life cycle, we're looking at improvement in fuels, and of course, using that research base to understand the operational activities in our own Opal reactor. And thank you to Pamela, who is also in the audience here, who is responsible for the operations of that reactor. And then, of course, moving through that life cycle, that research activity also focuses in on the waste stream, and we'll be hearing from Paula Berghofer later on today around our waste activities, as well as, I believe from Rowan, about on our Synrock technology. So watch this space, but these are the activities that we focus our effort and our energies and our capabilities on developing these technologies so that we can actually have, again, that responsible full-scale operation of the nuclear life cycle in the current Australian context. So we also, I've talked about some of the nuclear-based research and activities that we do, but underpinning those is the platforms, the laboratories that you require to be able to do that research. And we are unique in having Australia's only licensed facilities for handling a very wide range of active materials, in particular our actinide suite, the materials fabrication bay, and the PI cells, the post-irradiation examination infrastructure, which allows us to do examination of a wide range of materials that are highly active. And so this entire active suite, again, gives you that ability to do what in another context would be in some ways standard materials research, but doing that with materials that are much, much more complex to handle. And then, of course, complementing that, we also have the non-active facilities as well to allow us to do those inspections and understandings on the material science level. So it's that combination of unique infrastructure and unique skills and experience that allow us to operate credibly in this space. And if you put those together, that then gives us an activity that we also call nuclear stewardship, which is where the research meets the concept of nuclear stewardship. So these abilities to do radionuclide metrology, nuclear forensics, the radioanalytical chemistry, all of these to go into as well the environmental monitoring, allow us to have a capability that can be that trusted advisor to government in regards to how nuclear activities are proceeding, not only in Australia but around the world, and have that full understanding, not only on a theoretical basis, but with that ability to be able to measure and back up that advice. So we often refer to ANSTO as being knowledge, research and development, use in terms of the nuclear medicines or value, and trust around the advice that we're able to give. And so all of this comes from what I broadly refer to here as nuclear stewardship. Now, as I've said, there's also the applications of nuclear science and technology that I've mentioned in terms of the health, the environment and the infrastructure. But fundamentally, it's that nuclear stewardship and that credible operation in that space that gives us, as ANSTO, that social licence to operate. And by proximity with all of our collaborators and partners. The social licence, a bit like culture, is something that we often regard as those sort of soft skills. If we can get the physics right, if we can get the chemistry right, then surely everybody will follow. But I think, as everybody in this room knows, the long experience is that it's actually not about black and white numbers. It's actually about winning the heart, not just the hearts and minds, but winning that understanding and winning that ability to be able to engage with people, which we broadly refer to as social licence. And again, like many of these things, it's difficult to measure. So one of the things we have done is in our own hinterland, have actually surveyed the residents in the area around Lucas Heights. Because if we can't actually convince our local residents that nuclear is a good thing, then how are we, as a room, going to be able to do it broadly where it's needed and when it's needed? So that poll was actually very interesting. So it actually shows two things. There's 51% there saying we feel positively or somewhat positively about nuclear in the environment. There's about 44% who are sort of sitting on the fence, and there's a very, very small number, about 5%, who have strong unfavourable feelings in the immediate area. Now, this is remarkable because if you go out and survey most companies will give their eye teeth to have a 5% figure in the disfavourable column. You know, even the companies we all know and love actually always have some people who fall into that column. So it's really interesting that cut through is there in the local community, that awareness and understanding of the benefits and the potential uses and understandings of nuclear science and technology. And that, I think, is something that we have to think about as we go forward. Now, of course, we've also heard, and as I said, you can call me naive, but there are a number of reasons why it does seem that there's a new discussion in the air about nuclear. Some of these are obviously the announcement about nuclear-powered submarines for Australia, but also the moves forward towards our National Radioactive Waste Management Facility. On the ANSTO site, there have been significant recent investments improving our ability to protect Australia's supply chain in nuclear medicine. So if you couple those with the other things that we just heard about, the announcement of reactors in the UK, a real in-depth and ongoing discussion about the energy balance that will need to be present to address climate change, all of these factors are there to say there are opportunities for Australia to further the conversation about nuclear. And I'll just spend the last couple of minutes talking about one aspect of that again, and I'm intentionally focusing on some of the areas that we, as I've said, refer to as soft skills. We've talked about culture, we've talked about social licence. The other thing we do need to talk about going forward is what are the skills of the nuclear workforce of the future? we have a relatively small number of people in Australia who I would regard as being nuclear literate. If many of these activities are going to grow and enhance in the future, how are we going to grow the knowledge, the literacy, the hands-on skills in that workforce? It's often said, it's been said by a number of people actually regarding the nuclear-powered submarines, which, as we know, we'll see the first nuclear-powered submarine floating around somewhere probably in a couple of decades' time. So the captain of that first nuclear-powered submarine is probably a 6 or 7-year-old girl sitting in a kindergarten somewhere in Australia right now. And so how is that 6 or 7-year-old girl going to acquire those skills and the knowledge and, dare I say it, the passion to go into that field of endeavour? So we look to some of the things we're already doing. So at ANSTO, we put a lot of time and effort into various programs that help engender these skills. So in here, what you're looking at are a number of programs, and I'm conscious of the fact that I'm claiming ANSI, and so this is not just ANSTO's programs, but these are other programs, and you'll be hearing from Michelle Durant later on today. But there are a broad range of fellowships, scholarships, internships, year in industry placements, apprenticeships, traineeships that are available, that are mediated by ANSTO and by our partners such as ANSI. So these give what I would call early career researcher skills into the workforce. But we also look at specific technical developments. So there are safety technician development programs, and as you can see here, across a wide range of activity. One of the things that is often talked about in the context of not just nuclear-powered subs, but waste management, as well as the space environment, is how are some of our lawyers going to understand a bit more about nuclear science and technology? So looking at how we can actually put them through training programs about Nuclear 101, about commercial and regulatory impacts that they may be involved with. So all of these are programs that are either developed up or being developed up and available. And then even more hands-on, specific radiation safety training programs. You know, we've probably all been through radiation inductions in various organisations. This is the very base level for all of our radiation workers. But again, wouldn't it be great if everybody working in an office had actually done some of that training and understands the relative impacts of different types of radiation that can be out there, and just indeed how little is out there in terms of interaction with the human body. So all of these courses are also available. So if you put all of that together, that leaves us in a really interesting situation that says, how are we then planning for this new area of nuclear in Australia? And of course, the short answer is nobody does this in isolation. All of us, all the organisations in this room, I'm sure, are interacting, partnering, collaborating in various ways. And this is also one of ANSTO's touchstones, that where we operate, we are doing this as the stewards for the nation of specific types of nuclear technologies that exist in the country already. And to take this forward, the partnerships and the collaborations are things that we will continue those discussions. So they're I guess, the themes that I wanted to set for this conversation. And as I said, you'll hear some of the specific activities from some of our other speakers later on today. Thank you.